Orchestrated wolf-shifter screenplay structure with cinematic dialogue and survival philosophy. Orchestrated wolf-shifter screenplay structure with cinematic dialogue and survival philosophy. Every satisfying crown has a woman underneath it who swallowed enough poison to become immune. Tonight, the Moonfire Banquet will crown a mistress where a queen once sat, and nobody in that glittering hall has any idea what it costs to watch someone steal your throne while you're still bleeding from the war that saved it. Stay with me until the very last word of this story. I promise you, the ending will hit different. Drop a like, leave the name of your city in the comments, and let me know your pack is riding with me tonight. Now settle in. This one burns slow. The chandeliers inside the Moonfire Hall hung like frozen explosions, every crystal dripping amber light across a banquet table long enough to seat 40 wolves and wide enough to hold every lie the kingdom had ever swallowed. Servants moved in pairs along the marble corridor, carrying silver trays loaded with roasted venison and dark wine that smelled like blackberries crushed under a boot heel. The scent of it mixed with the cedar smoke pouring from the twin hearths at each end of the hall, filling the room with something thick and ancient and false. Every seat had been arranged with ruthless precision. Name cards written in gold ink. Seating charts approved by the royal steward himself. Every detail engineered to project strength, unity, a crown that still meant something. Except for one detail nobody expected. The chair beside Alpha King Riker Vale, the Luna's chair, the one carved from ironwood and inlaid with silver moonstone, had been moved 6 seats down the table, and in its place sat Celine Hart. She wore blood-red silk that clung to her like it had been poured on while still wet. Her dark hair fell in waves over bare shoulders, and a diamond choker caught the firelight every time she turned her head to laugh at something Riker whispered against her ear. She was not hiding. She was not pretending to be a guest. She sat in the Luna's chair with her fingers resting lightly on the armrest like she had been born to it, and the look on her face was the particular kind of satisfaction that only exists when someone has taken something they know does not belong to them. Riker sat tall beside her, his jaw freshly shaved, his ceremonial armor polished to a mere sheen. He looked like a king. He looked like a man who had made a decision and dared the world to challenge it. His hand rested on Celine's wrist, casual, possessive, deliberate. Every alpha, beta, and elder in the room saw it. That was the point. General Aldrich Voss leaned toward Commander Petra Hale at the far end of the table and muttered without moving his lips. "He moved the Luna's chair." Petra did not blink. "I can see that. In front of every allied alpha in the Northern Territories." "I said I can see it." Aldrich's fingers tightened around his goblet. His knuckles were scarred from 30 years of border wars, and the tendons in his forearm jumped like they were looking for something to hit. "This is not a banquet. This is a declaration." Petra said nothing. She watched the double doors at the far end of the hall and waited. The doors opened. Evelyn Thorn entered the Moonfire Hall alone. She wore a gown of pale silver, close-fitted through the bodice and falling in a clean line to the floor. No jewels except the Luna's signet ring on her left hand, and a thin chain at her throat that held nothing, a pendant removed, a symbol she no longer carried. Her auburn hair was pulled back tight from her face, exposing the scar along her left temple where a blade had caught her during the Ashenvale siege 3 winters ago. She had taken that scar pulling Riker's unconscious body off a burning rampart while his own guards fled. She walked without hurry. Her spine was straight, her chin level, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. Every step was measured, deliberate, the walk of a woman who had learned long ago that haste is a luxury the hunted cannot afford. The whispering started before she reached the center of the hall. Lady Margot Sable, seated near the middle of the table, turned to Lord Harmon beside her and did not bother lowering her voice. "She actually came. Did you think she wouldn't?" "I thought she would at least have the dignity to pretend she was ill." Harmon shook his head. "That woman does not pretend anything. That is her problem." Evelyn heard them. She heard all of them. The rustle of silk as bodies leaned toward each other, the intake of breath, the click of a goblet set down too quickly. She had spent 5 years hearing these sounds. She knew every pitch, every rhythm, every shade of contempt that could fit inside a whisper. She had cataloged them the way a soldier catalogs the sounds of a forest before an ambush, not because she enjoyed it, because survival demanded it. She found her new seat, 6 places from the head of the table, between Lord Harmon, who would not meet her eyes, and Elder Thessa Wren, who met them too directly, with the kind of pity that cuts worse than mockery. Evelyn pulled the chair out herself. No servant moved to help her. She sat, smoothed the fabric of her gown across her knees, and folded her hands on the table in front of her. From the head of the table, Celine looked down the row and smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It was the kind of smile that made you forget the teeth behind it. "Evelyn," Celine called, her voice carrying easily across the hall. "You look lovely tonight. That shade of silver is perfect for you, so understated, so quiet." Evelyn looked at her. Just looked. The way you look at weather coming in. "Thank you, Celine. I mean it, truly. Some women are meant for the spotlight. Others are meant to sit near it and enjoy the warmth." Celine's fingers curled around the stem of her wine glass, and she drank without breaking eye contact. "You should be proud. Not everyone ages so gracefully under pressure." Elder Thessa Wren stiffened beside Evelyn. Across the table, General Aldrich's hand moved to his belt, an old habit from decades of reaching for a weapon before his mind finished registering the threat. Evelyn's expression did not change. She reached for her own glass, lifted it, and took a slow drink. The wine was bitter and excellent. She set the glass down and looked at the candle flame nearest to her. She thought about fire. She thought about how fire does not announce itself. It does not ask permission. It does not explain what it intends to burn. It simply waits until the air is right, and then it takes everything. That thought stayed with her through the first course. The venison arrived bloody at the center, the way northern wolves preferred it, and the hall filled with the sounds of cutting and chewing and the performative laughter of people determined to prove they were having a good time. Riker carved meat for Celine with his own hands, a gesture traditionally reserved for the Luna during formal feasts. He did it openly, smiling, leaning close to murmur something that made her press her forehead against his shoulder. Commander Petra Hale watched this from her seat and thought about the 300 soldiers who had died at Ashenvale Pass under Evelyn's command because Riker had refused to send reinforcements in time. She thought about the supply routes Evelyn had negotiated single-handedly with the Grey March Pack, routes that still fed the capital through every winter. She thought about the woman sitting 6 chairs from the crown, eating venison in silence. And she wondered what it felt like to build a kingdom with your bare hands and then watch someone else hang curtains in it. "She will not last the year," Petra said quietly to Aldrich. "Celine?" "The kingdom. Without Evelyn holding the alliances together, this whole thing comes apart like wet rope." Aldrich studied his plate. "The king does not seem concerned. The king has not been concerned about anything real in a long time." Midway through the second course, Elder Councilman Torrin Marsh rose from his seat. He was old, not old in the decorative way that some powerful men are, with silver temples and distinguished posture. Torrin was old in the way that mountains are old, weathered, cracked in places, still standing only because nothing had yet found the right angle to push him down. He had served 4 kings, survived 2 civil wars, and buried his own son on a battlefield that Riker's father had chosen and Riker's father had lost. When Torrin spoke, even the servants stopped moving. "My king," Torrin said. His voice was dry and unhurried. "Before the third course, might I offer the traditional acknowledgement of the Luna's contributions to the realm this past year?" Riker looked up from his plate. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that most of the room would miss, but that Evelyn saw with perfect clarity because she had spent 5 years studying that jaw, learning its moods the way a prisoner learns the moods of the guard who holds the keys. "That will not be necessary tonight, Elder Torrin." Torrin remained standing. "With respect, my king, the acknowledgement is not ceremony, it is record. The Luna's command during the Ashenvale campaign, her negotiation of the Grey March supply treaties, her restructuring of the Eastern patrol routes after the border raids. These are matters of historical. I said it will not be necessary." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. It pressed down on the table, on the candles, on the shoulders of every person in the room who understood what was being erased. Celine leaned forward, and the diamond choker at her throat scattered light across the tablecloth like broken glass. "Torrin, darling, you are so sweet to want to honor the past, but perhaps we should focus on the future tonight." She placed her hand over Riker's. After all, the future is sitting right here. Torrin looked at her. He looked at her with the patient, measuring gaze of a man who has watched dozens of ambitious people climb ladders that were leaning against the wrong wall. Miss Hart, the traditional acknowledgement recognizes the Luna of the realm. The Luna is not a position that has been vacated. Celine's smile did not waver. Not yet. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn felt it hit somewhere behind her sternum. Not the word itself. She had been expecting something like this for months. It was the casualness, the absolute certainty in Celine's voice, as if the displacement of a Luna was something that had already happened and the rest of them were simply slow to notice. Riker cleared his throat. Enough, Torrin. Sit down. We are here to celebrate. To celebrate what, my king? The strength of the realm. Torrin stood for one more breath. 2. Then he lowered himself back into his chair with the careful movements of a man who knows that the time for words has nearly passed and the time for consequences has nearly arrived. The third course came. Evelyn did not eat. She was running calculations. Not the emotional kind, though those were operating in the background with a steady, grinding ache that she had long since learned to carry the way you carry a wound that will not close. She was calculating alliances, debts, troop positions. The 17 northern packs whose loyalty she had secured personally during the border campaigns. The trade agreements she had signed in her own name because Riker could not be bothered to learn the difference between a tariff and a tribute. The intelligence network she had built with her own money, her own risk, her own sleepless nights spent reading intercepted letters by candlelight while Riker slept in a bed that smelled like someone else's perfume. She had always known this moment would come. Not the specifics, not the banquet, not the chair, not the red silk dress on the woman who had replaced her, but the architecture of it. The shape of a man who mistakes the scaffolding for the building, who tears it down because he thinks the walls will hold on their own. She had prepared. The thought should have made her feel strong. Instead, it made her feel tired. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being right about something terrible, from watching it arrive exactly as you predicted, and knowing that being right will not protect you from the damage. Midway through dessert, Riker stood. The hall quieted instantly. "I have enjoyed this evening," he said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who has been king long enough to know how to perform sincerity. The Moonfire Banquet is a tradition of unity, of renewal. And tonight, I wish to honor that tradition by making a change that is long overdue. He looked down at Celine. She looked up at him. They had rehearsed this. Evelyn could see the choreography and the timing of their gazes, the way Celine tilted her head at exactly the angle that caught the candlelight. "Evelyn," Riker said. He did not look at her when he said her name. He looked at the room. "You have served this kingdom admirably. Your sacrifices are noted and appreciated." Noted, appreciated. The words of a performance review. The words you use for a servant who is being dismissed with references. "But a kingdom must evolve," Riker continued. "And evolution requires new partnerships, new energy, new vision." General Aldrich's chair scraped against the marble floor. He caught himself and sat still, but the sound cut through the room like a blade across leather. "I am asking you," Riker said, and now he did look at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has already decided and is only performing the courtesy of a question, to step aside from your position beside the throne, voluntarily, with honor. With honor. As if honor could be stripped and gifted back in the same sentence. As if honor were his to distribute. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the man she had married 7 years ago on a battlefield because there was no time for ceremony, because the southern packs were advancing and someone needed to unite the northern houses before dawn. She had married him with blood on her boots and ash in her hair, and she had spent every year since then fighting wars. He started in cleaning up messes he refused to acknowledge and sleeping alone in a bed that grew colder with every passing season. She had loved him once, not the grand sweeping love of ballads and bards, the practical love, the kind that carries water uphill because the village needs it, the kind that does not need to be noticed to keep working. That love was dead now. She could feel the exact spot where it had been, like a tooth socket after an extraction, empty and tender and faintly surprised by its own absence. "You want me to leave my chair?" Evelyn said. Her voice was level. It was the voice she used in military councils when she needed men twice her size to stop talking and listen. "I want you to understand that the kingdom is moving forward." "Moving forward," she repeated. "Toward what?" Celine answered before Riker could. "Toward someone who actually belongs beside a king." The hall held its breath. Evelyn turned her head slowly and looked at Celine. There was nothing in her expression, no rage, no pain, no weakness for anyone to feed on. There was only the flat, calm attention of a woman who has been underestimated for the last time and knows it. "You want this chair," Evelyn said to Celine. Just the fact. No inflection. "I want what is mine." "Nothing in this hall is yours. Nothing in this kingdom is yours. You came here with a red dress and a smile, and you think that is enough to rule." Celine stood up, and the motion was sharp, deliberate, the coiled energy of a woman who had spent months waiting for this confrontation and was furious that Evelyn was not giving her the emotional spectacle she wanted. "I think," Celine said, leaning forward over the table, "that a Luna who cannot hold her king's attention does not deserve to hold his crown. Attention is not loyalty. Attention is what you give a fire until it burns out." Riker slammed his palm on the table. "Enough! Evelyn, I am not asking you. I am telling you. Stand down." The command hit the room like the crack of bone. It was an alpha's order, not a husband's request, not a king's suggestion. The raw, undiluted weight of dominance, the kind that sends wolves to their knees without conscious thought. Evelyn felt it. Every nerve in her body registered it, the pull at the base of her skull, the pressure on her shoulders, the ancient biological imperative to submit, to yield, to lower her eyes and accept the hierarchy she had been born into. She stood instead. She stood slowly, the way a blade comes out of a sheath, and the silver gown fell straight along her body like armor she had chosen instead of been given. She placed both hands flat on the table and looked at Riker, and in that moment, every person in the Moonfire Hall understood that they were not watching a domestic dispute. They were watching a power structure crack. "I will stand," Evelyn said, "but I will not stand down." She turned. She walked away from the table. Her steps were unhurried, measured, the cadence of a woman who is not fleeing but repositioning. She passed General Aldrich, who rose to his feet as she passed. She passed Commander Petra Hale, who rose also. She passed Elder Torin, who did not rise because his knees would not allow it, but who bowed his head as she went by, a gesture older than the monarchy itself. She walked toward the double doors. Behind her, Riker's voice came tight and hard. "If you walk through those doors, you walk away from everything." Evelyn stopped. She did not turn around. "No, Riker," she said. "If I walk through these doors, you lose everything. You just do not know it yet." She pushed the doors open and stepped into the corridor. The cold hit her like a wall of water. The corridor outside the Moonfire Hall was unheated, lined with stone that had been absorbing winter for centuries, and the air tasted like iron and frost, and the faint mineral tang of old masonry. Evelyn felt the sweat on the back of her neck turn to ice. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from the sheer physical effort of controlling every muscle in her body for the past 2 hours, holding her spine straight, holding her voice steady, holding herself together while every cell screamed at her to either break down or burn something. She pressed her back against the stone wall and breathed. In the battlefield of the self, breathing is the only weapon that never runs out. She had learned that in Ashenvale, dragging wounded soldiers through smoke so thick you could chew it, her lungs burning, her vision narrowing to a tunnel, and still she breathed because the moment you stop breathing deliberately, you start dying accidentally. Footsteps behind her. 2 sets. She did not need to look. "Commander, General." Petra Hale and Aldrich Voss materialized from the shadows of the corridor like they had been part of it all along. "Luna," Petra said. The title was deliberate. It was not a courtesy. It was a declaration of allegiance. "What do you need?" "Time." "How much?" 3 days. Aldrich crossed his arms. His face was the color and texture of weathered oak, and his eyes were the flat, calculating eyes of a man who has spent his life deciding who lives and who dies on the basis of terrain and timing. What happens in 3 days? Celine will overreach. She always does. She cannot help it. Ambition without intelligence is a fire without a chimney. It burns everything, including the house it is trying to warm. And if the king moves against you before then? Evelyn looked at Aldrich. If Riker moves against me, he will discover that the 17 Northern Pack alliances I built are not pledged to the crown. They are pledged to me, personally, by blood oath. Aldrich blinked. It was the most emotion she had seen from him in a decade. You did that deliberately. I did everything deliberately, General. That is why we are all still alive. Petra stepped closer. Her voice dropped to the register she used for operational briefings, the kind where the information being shared could start or end a war. Luna, I have something you should see. My intelligence officers intercepted correspondence 3 weeks ago, letters from Celine Hart to officials in the eastern provinces. She has been bribing members of the Judicial Council, falsifying charges against PAC members who refused to support her claim. She framed 2 innocent families for treason to seize their holdings and funnel the assets to Riker's personal treasury. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. The exhaustion drained from her face, replaced by something colder and more precise. You have the original letters, sealed and secured outside the capital. Physical evidence, not copies. Originals, with Celine's handwriting, her seal, and the signatures of the officials she bought. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. In the silence, the distant sounds of the banquet leaked through the closed doors, muffled laughter and the clink of glasses and the performative noise of people pretending everything was fine. She is not just an ambitious woman, Evelyn said. She is a criminal. And she has made Riker complicit, whether he knows it or not. He knows, Aldrich said flatly. Men like that always know. They just build enough distance between themselves and the evidence to call it ignorance. Then we do not give him the luxury of distance, Petra nodded. When? Evelyn pushed herself off the wall. The trembling in her hands had stopped. The thing about grief is that it is heaviest when you are sitting still. The moment you start moving, the weight redistributes. It does not disappear, but it settles into the muscles and the bones, and your body learns to carry it the way it learns to carry anything. One step at a time. Not tonight, Evelyn said. Tonight I let Celine celebrate. I let her believe she has won. I let Riker believe he has made the right choice. Because nothing makes a person more careless than the belief that they have already succeeded. She began walking down the corridor, and the 2 most powerful military officers in the kingdom fell into step beside her without being asked. Tomorrow I begin pulling the threads. Every alliance, every trade route, every military commitment that runs through my name and my blood. Riker does not know the architecture of his own kingdom because he never bothered to learn it. He thinks the crown is the source of power. He has never understood that the crown is just a symbol, and symbols only work as long as someone real is standing behind them. They reached the end of the corridor. A tall window looked out over the capital, a sprawl of stone and torchlight that spread across the valley floor like embers from a dying fire. Beyond it, the dark shapes of the northern mountains rose against a sky choked with stars. Evelyn stood at the window and looked at the kingdom she had built with her own hands, with her own blood, with her own sleepless years and uncounted sacrifices. She had not built it for herself. She had built it because it needed to be built, because the people inside those stone walls and wooden houses deserved someone who would fight for them even when they did not know a fight was happening. Riker thinks I am his wife, Evelyn said quietly. He thinks I am his Luna. He thinks I am a position he can fill or empty at will. He has never understood what I actually am. Petra waited. I am the foundation, and you do not fire the foundation. The foundation fires you. Back inside the Moonfire Hall, the celebration continued without any sign of concern. Celine had moved fully into the Luna's chair now, leaning back, her legs crossed beneath the table, a fresh glass of wine in her hand. She was telling a story to the nearest cluster of nobles, something about a hunting trip where she had outrun an entire pack of wild boars, and the nobles were laughing with the aggressive enthusiasm of people who understood that laughing was a survival strategy. Riker watched Evelyn's empty chair. He watched it for longer than he intended to, and the feeling that moved through his chest was not guilt because guilt requires the admission that something has been done wrong. It was something more primitive than guilt. It was the instinct that fires at the back of every predator's brain when the territory suddenly feels too quiet, when the prey that should be running is simply standing still, when the thing you thought was beneath you turns its head and you realize for the first time that its eyes have been open the entire time. He shook it off. He reached for his wine. Celine pressed her cheek against his shoulder and whispered something about their future, and he let her voice fill the space where the warning had been. He would remember this moment later. He would remember the exact quality of the firelight, the exact weight of Celine's head against his arm, the exact taste of the wine that he drank while his kingdom quietly began to slip through his fingers like sand through an open hand. But tonight, he smiled. Tonight, in a darkened corridor 3 floors below the banquet hall, Evelyn Thorn sat at a desk she had built in secret 2 years ago, opened a locked drawer with a key she kept on a chain around her ankle, and pulled out a leather folio containing the names, debts, loyalties, and vulnerabilities of every powerful wolf in the realm. She opened it, she picked up a pen, and she began to write. Outside the window, the first wolf howl of the night split the silence over the capital, long and low and ancient, the sound of something waking up in the dark that had been pretending to sleep. The ink dried on the last name before midnight. Evelyn set the pen down and pressed her thumb against the final entry in the folio, feeling the slight indentation of the letters against her skin. 31 names. 31 wolves who owed her something that could not be repaid with gold or ceremony. Debt of blood. Debt of survival. The kind of debt that gets collected in the dark, quietly, without witnesses. Because the wolves who owe it understand that the alternative is having the entire kingdom learn exactly how they came to be standing upright instead of buried. She closed the folio, locked it, tucked the key back against her ankle bone where it had lived for 2 years. The candle on the desk had burned to 1/3 of its original height. Somewhere above her, the Moonfire Banquet was still going. She could feel the vibration of it through the stone ceiling, the low, persistent pulse of music and movement, the particular frequency of a room full of powerful people pretending that nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted. The room did not know it yet. That was fine. The room never knows first. The room always finds out last, when the knowledge arrives wearing boots and carrying something that cannot be argued with. She stood. Her back ached from the chair, a deep, grinding complaint from the muscles along her spine that had been locked rigid all evening. She let the ache be there. She did not stretch, did not roll her shoulders, did not give herself the relief of releasing what she had been holding. Not yet. The body is a record of everything you have survived and everything you are still surviving, and Evelyn had learned that releasing tension too early is how you miss the thing that comes at you sideways. She blew out the candle. She sat in the dark for 3 full breaths, letting her eyes adjust, letting the silence of the underground room become familiar. Then she moved to the door. She did not go back to her quarters. She went to the barracks. The northern garrison was quartered in the east wing of the palace grounds, a long stone building that smelled permanently of weapon oil and wet wool, and the particular sour exhaustion of soldiers who have been standing ready for something that keeps not arriving. The night watch was posted at the gate. Evelyn came up the side path where the wall torches had a gap, the gap she had quietly arranged 3 months ago when she requested a new torch schedule, citing fire risk. The sentry at the inner door was a young wolf named Cade, 22 years old, with a jaw full of acne scars and eyes that were older than the rest of his face. He had been posted here since the border campaigns. He had carried water to the wounded under fire at Ashenvale because someone had to, because the healers were overwhelmed and the Alpha King's personal guard had already retreated, and Cade had done it without being asked and without stopping until his arms gave out. He saw Evelyn coming and straightened. He did not salute. He pressed his fist against his chest, the old gesture, the one that predated the crown and the royal court and every ceremony the palace had invented to make itself feel legitimate, the gesture that meant simply, "I see you, I am with you." Evelyn stopped in front of him. "Cade? Luna? Where's Captain Bryn?" "Night patrol rotation, back at first light." "And Marsh?" "Sergeant Marsh is in the equipment room, running inventory." Of course he was. Aldrich had told him to. She recognized the shape of it, Aldrich positioning his most reliable people in useful locations the moment the banquet turned. He had spent 30 years thinking 3 moves ahead on battlefields far bloodier than a royal dinner hall. He had not stopped thinking just because the weapons were invisible. Tell Sergeant Marsh I will need his full roster by dawn. Names, pack affiliations, current loyalty oaths, and any outstanding personal debts to the crown. Cade did not blink. Understood, Luna. And Cade. Luna. When I say loyalty oaths, I mean the ones on paper, not the ones in the ceremony. The paper ones are policy. I need to know about the ones that are something else. He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression, not surprise but recognition, the look of a man who has been waiting for someone to say out loud the thing everyone already understood. Yes, Luna. She moved on. The hour before dawn in the palace was the emptiest hour. The night staff had finished their rounds. The morning staff had not yet started. In that narrow window between dark and light, the corridors belonged to no one, and in a place where every stone was owned by rank and title and access restriction, that absence felt like a kind of freedom. Evelyn used it. She moved through the East Gallery, the private records corridor, the administrative annex that handled trade documentation and treaty archives. She knew these hallways the way she knew her own heartbeat, not because she had been given access, because she had built half of what was in them. Because the actual governance of this kingdom had run through her hands for 5 years while Riker concerned himself with the performance of governance, the crown on his head and the sword on his belt, and the stories his heralds told about him in every Allied Pack's Great Hall. In the records room, she found what she needed in under 4 minutes. Cross-referenced territorial grants, executed in Celine's handwriting but bearing the royal seal, awarded to Eastern Province officials in the months following the Grey March Treaty. She had suspected this for 6 weeks. Now she had the originals in her hands, the physical evidence of a woman systematically redirecting royal land grants toward her own network, using Riker's seal without formal council approval. Without Evelyn's counter-signature, which was required for any land transfer above a certain value under the governance protocols she herself had drafted, and which Riker had signed into law without reading because he trusted her, and it had never occurred to him that the instrument of his trust could also become the instrument of her protection. She photographed nothing. She memorized everything. She returned the documents to their exact positions and walked out of the records room with the information living inside her skull where no one could confiscate it. She was back in her private quarters by the time the first gray light began pressing against the window glass. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the window and watched the Capitol come awake below her. The first smoke rising from kitchen chimneys, the distant sound of carts on stone streets, the slow brightening of the sky from charcoal to steel to the pale cold blue of a winter morning that had decided to arrive whether anyone was ready for it or not. She thought about what she had built. Not the alliances on paper, those she could enumerate in her sleep. She thought about the architecture underneath them, the invisible load-bearing structures of loyalty and obligation and mutual survival that most people never see because they are too busy looking at the decorative elements above. The throne is decorative. The crown is decorative. Power is in the foundation, and foundations are poured underground, in the dark, by people who understand that the building that rises above them will never acknowledge its own weight. Riker had never understood weight. He understood spectacle. He understood the performance of strength, the theater of dominance. He understood how to stand at the head of a table and project certainty into a room. He did not understand that certainty without infrastructure is just noise. She had been his infrastructure. She had been invisible the way infrastructure is invisible, noticed only when something breaks. She had decided, somewhere between the first course and the second course of the Moonfire Banquet, that something was going to break. The knock at her door came at mid-morning. 3 knocks. Firm and even. Official. She already knew before she opened it. 2 members of the Royal Guard stood in the corridor. She recognized them both. Anders, broad-shouldered and quiet, who had been posted on her detail for 18 months. Len, younger, with the flat, careful expression of someone executing an order they are not entirely comfortable with. Luna Thorn, Anders said. He could not keep his eyes quite level. They dropped to the floor by a fraction of a degree. The Alpha King requests your presence in the throne room. Requests? Evelyn said. A pause. Yes, Luna. She looked at Anders for a long moment. He was not a bad soldier. He was a man following orders in a system where the consequence of not following orders was immediate and personal. She did not hold it against him. She held it against the system. Tell the Alpha King I will be there in 20 minutes. She dressed with deliberate care. She chose the same silver gown from the night before, freshly pressed by her maid at first light because she had instructed her maid to have it ready. The message was specific. The silver meant rank. Wearing it again meant the rank had not been surrendered. She added nothing to it except the Luna's signet ring and the thin chain at her throat, still empty, still carrying its absence like a wound displayed rather than hidden. She arrived in the throne room in exactly 20 minutes. Riker was alone, which surprised her. She had expected Celine beside him, expected the full theater of it, the king on his throne with his chosen woman at his side, the formal staging of displacement. But Riker sat alone in the ironwood chair with a goblet he was not drinking from and the expression of a man who had slept badly and was blaming the wrong person for it. He looked at her when she entered and did not speak immediately. Evelyn stopped 15 feet from the dais. She did not approach the throne steps. She stood where she had always stood during formal audiences, at the distance that required him to project his voice if he wanted to address her across the room. The distance that subtly redistributed the weight of who was performing for whom. You should have stayed, Riker said. I was told to leave my chair. I told you to step down, not to leave. Those are the same thing, Riker. You just prefer the version that makes you feel less responsible for what it means. His jaw tightened. He set the goblet down on the armrest with a click of silver against ironwood. You embarrassed me. I walked out of a room. You humiliated me in front of every alpha and elder in the Northern Territories. I walked out of a room. You made a scene. I stood up and left. The scene was the woman sitting in my chair calling herself the future queen. I was not the one who created the scene. Riker stood. He was tall and physically significant in the way that Alpha Kings are, built for the impression of it. And on most days, that physicality was something Evelyn registered the way you register weather, a force in the environment that has to be accounted for. Today, it was simply mass, size without weight, a large thing that had not yet understood that size alone does not determine the outcome. I need you to release the Grey March supply agreements, he said. Re-execute them under the Crown's authority. There are procedural issues with the existing documentation. Evelyn looked at him. The procedural issues. He meant the signature. He meant that the Grey March Pack had signed those agreements with Evelyn Thorn, personally, not with the Crown, not with the Alpha King's office, but with a woman who had sat across a table from their elder council for 6 days in the dead of winter and negotiated every line by hand because she understood that wolves do not give loyalty to offices or titles. They give it to the person standing in front of them who has shown them they will not be abandoned. No, Evelyn said. The word was quiet. It was not angry. It was simply a door closing. Riker crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, and he stopped close enough that she could see the tension in his neck muscles, the slight redness along his jaw from a shave taken too quickly this morning, the particular pressure behind his eyes that meant he was operating on less sleep than he needed and more wine than was wise. You do not say no to me, he said. Low, the alpha register under it, the weight of dominance, the instinct-level pressure. Evelyn did not step back. She had stood in rooms full of armed men who wanted her dead, and she had not stepped back. She had stood on burning ramparts with smoke filling her lungs, and she had not stepped back. A man with a bad night's sleep and a goblet he was not drinking from was not the most frightening thing she had faced before noon on any given day. You gave away my chair, Evelyn said, in front of witnesses, in front of allied alphas and council elders. That was a political act, Riker. Political acts have political consequences. One of those consequences is that the agreements I made as Luna of this realm in my own name are mine to hold or mine to release. And I will not release them because you have decided someone else deserves the view from your throne room. The Grey March routes feed the capital. I know. I built them. If they collapse, they will not collapse. They will simply remain under the authority of the person who negotiated them. Me. Not the Crown. Me. You wanted me to step down from my position. Fine, but you do not get to remove the person and keep the work product. It does not function that way. He stared at her. In his face, she could see the exact moment when the instinct to dominate collided with the recognition that domination was not available here. Not cleanly, not without consequences he was not prepared for. And the collision produced something she had rarely seen in Riker Vale's face in 7 years of watching it. Uncertainty. "This is not over," he said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "It is not." She turned and walked toward the throne room doors. "Celine will be formally announced as my chosen Luna at the Winter Assembly," Riker said behind her. His voice was sharp and over-controlled, the voice of a man trying to reclaim ground he did not realize he had already lost. "In front of every pack Alpha on the continent. You should prepare yourself for that." Evelyn stopped. She did not turn around. The Winter Assembly, 3 weeks away. Every major Alpha in the known Wolf territories would attend. It was the most significant political gathering in a generation, the event that would set alliance structures and trade priorities for the next decade. It was the moment she had been building toward for 4 years, the culmination of every agreement she had brokered and every loyalty she had secured, and Riker wanted to use it as a stage for Celine's coronation. "The Winter Assembly," Evelyn said. Her voice was very calm. "Interesting choice." She pushed the doors open and walked out into the corridor, and the doors swung shut behind her with the soft, final sound of something closing that would not easily open again. In the empty corridor, out of sight of every guard and servant and watching eye, she finally allowed herself a breath. One long, deliberate inhalation that went all the way to the bottom of her lungs and back out slow. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was elevated but controlled, the rhythm of a body that has accepted the reality of a fight and is allocating resources accordingly. The Winter Assembly. He had just told her when and where. He had just told her the stage. She had not been planning to move this quickly. 3 weeks was aggressive. 3 weeks was a compressed timeline for what she needed to accomplish. The alliances confirmed, the evidence staged, the council positions secured, the variables reduced to a manageable number before the hammer came down. But compressed was not impossible. Compressed was simply the condition under which everything had to be done right the first time. She pulled the small folded paper from inside the cuff of her gown. She had written it before dawn, when she still thought she had 3 weeks of comfortable setup time. Now she read it again and made the arithmetic adjustment in her head, collapsing 3 weeks into 10 days, redistributing the sequence, identifying which pieces could be accelerated and which had hard minimums. Then she walked to the East Wing to find Petra Hale. She found her in the training yard, drilling a unit of scouts in close contact disarmament, moving through them with calm, efficient corrections, grip angle here, weight distribution there. The voice of a woman who has made her body into a weapon and spent her life teaching others to do the same. When she saw Evelyn coming, she called a break without interrupting her stride and met her at the yard gate. "How bad?" Petra asked. "He wants to announce Celine at the Winter Assembly." Petra went very still. "That is 3 weeks. 10 days now." "Evelyn." "I know. The Northern Pack confirmations alone require—" "I know, Petra. I have the list. I have the sequence. I need 2 things from you." Petra crossed her arms and waited. "The original letters your intelligence officers retrieved from Celine. I need them here. Physical copies, here, in my possession, within 5 days." "Done. What else?" Evelyn looked at her. She looked at this woman who had ridden into enemy territory with her on a false intelligence report and never once suggested they turn back. This woman who had buried her own career advancement twice to stay posted where Evelyn needed her instead of advancing where the system wanted her. This woman who had spent 6 years standing in the gap between Evelyn's strategy and the chaos it was designed to manage. "I need you to send word to Alpha Caro Vane of the Stoneback Pack. Tonight. Tell him the Luna requests a private meeting before the Winter Assembly." Petra's eyes sharpened. Caro Vane was not in Evelyn's folio. He was not one of the 31. He was something different. He was the most powerful independent alpha on the continent, a man who had refused to kneel to Riker twice and survived both refusals, who led a territory that sat at the geographic center of every major trade route in the region, and who had told Evelyn, at a border conference 2 years ago, that the day she chose to rule on her own terms, he would be the first to stand beside her.
She had not forgotten. Caro Vane coming to the Winter Assembly changes the calculus entirely, Petra said slowly. That is the point. Petra was quiet for 3 full seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality of a door being opened that had been locked for a long time. You are not just leaving him, Evelyn. You are replacing him.
Evelyn looked out across the training yard, at the scouts resuming their drills, at the cold winter sky above the palace walls, at the distant line of the northern mountains where the 31 pack alphas who owed her blood debt were waking up this morning to a kingdom that had not yet realized it was already mid-collapse. I am not replacing anyone, she said. I am taking what I built. She turned and walked back toward the palace. Behind her, Petra Hale stood motionless for one long moment, and then she moved with the brisk, purposeful stride of a woman who has just been handed the most important assignment of her career and intends to do it perfectly. And somewhere in the palace above them, Celine Hart was choosing a dress for the Winter Assembly announcement, turning in front of a mirror, admiring the future she had stolen, not knowing that the woman whose future she had taken was 10 steps ahead of her and moving faster every hour. Not running, never running, walking. The way you walk when you already know where you're going and the destination will still be there when you arrive. The folio under Evelyn's arm contained 31 names. She was about to add one more. The message from Caro Vane arrived on the 4th day. Not a letter. A writer. A single wolf in stoneback gray who came through the northern gate at mid-morning and asked for the Luna by name, not the Alpha King, not the palace, the Luna, and handed her a folded square of heavy parchment sealed with black wax pressed flat, no signet, no crest, the kind of seal you use when you want the message to arrive without announcing where it came from. Evelyn broke it in the corridor outside the records annex with Petra 2 steps behind her. 2 sentences. Caro Vane's handwriting was economical and ugly, the writing of a man who learned letters for utility rather than presentation. Agreed. Come alone. She folded the paper and put it inside her cuff. Her pulse did not change. She had been expecting yes. She had built the approach carefully, laid the ask inside context that made refusal more expensive than agreement, and Caro Vane had not survived 20 years as the most powerful independent alpha on the continent by failing to read the direction a wind was turning. He said yes, Petra said. Not a question. He said yes. When? 2 days before the assembly. His territory? Neutral ground. Petra breathed out through her nose. That is cutting it extremely close. Close is not the same as wrong. Evelyn moved down the corridor. How are we on the letters? Courier left last night. They will be here in 3 days. And the council? Elder Thorn has spoken privately with 4 of the 7 seated members. All 4 are willing to hear formal testimony before the assembly opens, not a commitment. A willingness. A willingness is enough for now. She turned the corner toward the administrative wing and stopped. Anders was posted outside her records room, not on his regular rotation. Off schedule, standing straight, hands clasped behind his back, with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had been placed somewhere and told not to explain why. Evelyn looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Anders. Luna. His eyes went to the wall above her head. What is the reason for this post? A pause of half a second too long. Standing orders, Luna. She looked at the door behind him. The lock was a heavy iron mechanism she had chosen personally, keyed to 2 copies, one on her person and one in a sealed envelope in Elder Thorn's private safe. The lock appeared untouched. The door frame appeared untouched. But the dust on the lower hinge was disturbed. A thin crescent of clean iron showing through where something had pressed against it at an angle that natural movement would not produce. Someone had pushed that door from the inside, not hard, not to force it, but with the particular careful pressure of a person who was listening for whether the bolt had fully engaged. Someone had been in that room. Her face showed nothing. Her body showed nothing. She nodded once at Anders and walked past him down the corridor at the same pace she always walked, and she did not look back, and she did not speak to Petra until they were through the outer doors and into the cold of the north courtyard, where the wind came off the mountain face and made conversation something you had to choose deliberately. Someone was in my records room, Evelyn said. Petra went still. When? Recently, within the last 12 hours. She kept walking, eyes forward, a woman taking a morning circuit of the courtyard. Nothing unusual about it. The letters from Celine, the ones your couriers are carrying. How many people knew the route? 3. Myself, the courier, and the officer who arranged the safe house stops. Which officer? Petra did not answer immediately. The pause was fractional, but Evelyn had been reading Petra Hale for 6 years, and she knew the frequency of every hesitation in that woman's communication. And this one was not calculation. It was something closer to the feeling you get in your chest before you say something you cannot unsay. Davin Holt, Petra said. The name landed in Evelyn's stomach like a stone dropped into cold water. Davin Holt, 12 years in the Palace Guard. Promoted 3 times on Evelyn's direct recommendation. Given the officer posting because she had argued for him when Aldrich wanted someone older. A man she had trusted with logistics twice before. Trusted precisely because he understood discretion and understood what happened to wolves who did not practice it. Are you certain? He was the only officer with the access level and the route details. I chose him because I know why you chose him. I would have chosen him too. Evelyn stopped walking. She stood in the center of the courtyard with the cold cutting through the silver gown and the wind pulling loose strands of hair across her face, and she did not move them. She stood very still and let the information fully arrive. When did you tell him? 2 days ago, the morning after your meeting with Riker. 2 days ago. The same window in which someone had accessed her records room. The same window in which Anders had appeared on an unscheduled post outside her door. The shape of it assembled in her mind with the grinding mechanical clarity that replaces emotion when the stakes become too immediate for the luxury of feeling. Someone had reached Davin Holt before the courier left. Someone who knew to look at him, who knew his access level, who knew which logistics officer would be assigned to a sensitive route originating from Petra Hale. Celine had someone inside, not a peripheral someone, not a servant who overheard a hallway conversation. Someone with genuine intelligence network access, someone who understood the operational structure of the palace's internal security well enough to identify the exact pressure point in a 3-person chain, which meant the letters were either intercepted or compromised. And if they were compromised, Celine knew what was coming. Evelyn started moving again. Not the measured courtyard circuit, a different pace. Purposeful, direct, the pace of a woman recalculating in real time. I need to know if the courier is still moving, she said. I can send a rider. Do not send anything. A rider on that route right now confirms we know there is a problem. If they are watching the route, a rider tells them we are scrambling. She pushed through the inner courtyard gate. I need Aldrich. She found him in the weapons hall, running edge maintenance on a battle sword that did not need it. The methodical scraping rhythm of a man who sharpens metal when he needs to think. He looked up when she entered and read her face in the first half-second and set the sword down on the bench without wiping his hands. How bad? He said. I have a leak. Davin Holt. The courier route is potentially compromised. Aldrich's expression did not change. He had been in enough collapsing situations to understand that visible alarm is a resource expenditure that serves no tactical purpose. The letters. Possibly intercepted, possibly just flagged, I do not know yet. She stopped in front of him. I need to know what Celine actually has, right now. Because if she has the letters, and she knows I am building a case, she will not wait for the Winter Assembly to make her move. What kind of move? The kind that does not give me 10 days. Evelyn pressed her fingers against the edge of the workbench. The iron was cold and sharp-cornered, and she let it bite into her palm as a way of staying anchored to the physical present, while her mind ran the scenarios. If she goes to Riker tonight with evidence that I have been building an organized opposition, he does not need to hear my side. He banishes me. He uses the military statutes. He can have me out of this territory within 48 hours, and everything I built walks out with me and does him no good because the moment I am gone under those circumstances, every alliance I made in my own name dissolves rather than transfers. So she destroys you and the kingdom simultaneously, Aldrich said. She destroys me and does not care about the kingdom. That is the difference between us. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Outside the weapons hall, the morning continued its ordinary operations, boots on stone, the distant cadence of a drill count, the creak of a supply cart on the courtyard paving, all of it sounding exactly like itself and masking nothing. "There is something else," Aldrich said. He said it the way soldiers say the thing they have been sitting on. Not reluctance, precision. Waiting for the right moment in the briefing to introduce a complication that changes the entire shape of the problem. Evelyn looked at him. "I ran the duty roster last night, cross-referenced against the personnel movements during the Moonfire Banquet. And? Len was off rotation for 40 minutes during the banquet. His posted position was the inner gallery. He logged a sanitation break, 40 minutes. Len, the younger of the two guards who had come to her quarters that morning with Riker's summons. Not Anders. Len. She had looked at Anders. She had read the signs at her records room door and built a picture around Anders because he was older and posted out of schedule and his eyes had not met hers. She had built a picture, and the picture was the wrong picture, and the actual vector had been standing right beside it the whole time. The thing about traps is that you see them when you are looking for them. The thing about the very best traps is that they give you something obvious to look at. She had been played, not by Celine, who did not have the patience for that kind of layered misdirection, by someone who understood how Evelyn thought, who knew she would read the door and read the hinge dust and identify the most conspicuous signal and chase it, while the actual channel ran clean and quiet 6 feet away. "Who gave Len his orders?" she said. "The orders are logged under a proxy code. Clean paperwork. Someone who knows how to file in this system." Riker does not know how to file in this system. He has never learned it. "No," Aldrich agreed. "Celine does not know how to file in this system. She has been in this palace 4 months. No." Evelyn felt the cold settle into her chest and stay there. Not the cold of the winter air, the cold of an understanding that takes up permanent residence in your ribcage and rearranges everything around itself. Someone who has been here long enough to know the filing architecture. Someone who has access to proxy authorization codes. Someone who knew about my records room before I set up my folio operation, which means someone who has been positioned against me for longer than Celine has been in the picture. Aldrich said nothing. "This is not Celine's network," Evelyn said. "Celine walked into an infrastructure that was already here. Someone built this for her, or built it and then found her useful. Who benefits if both you and Riker are destabilized?" The question hung in the weapons hall air. Evelyn thought about the 31 names in her folio. She thought about which of them she had trusted with partial information. She thought about the 17 Northern Pack alliances and who had the knowledge base to understand their structure deeply enough to exploit the gaps in it. She thought about the Winter Assembly and who had the most to gain from a power vacuum at the summit of the kingdom's governance. She thought about Elder Thorn, who had risen at the Moonfire Banquet to defend her publicly and asked Riker to acknowledge her contributions in front of every witness in the room. Elder Thorn, who had spoken privately with 4 council members in the last 2 days. Elder Thorn, who had suggested the very council challenge that had first planted in her mind the idea that her position was more structurally sound than Riker understood. Elder Thorn, who had known about the Blood Oath Pact structure that governed her northern alliances years before she had confirmed it to Aldrich last night. She had told Aldrich last night, and before dawn this morning, someone had been in her records room. "Thorn," she said, "the name felt like touching a wound you did not know you had." Aldrich closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The expression of a man who had reached the same conclusion 20 minutes earlier and had been deciding how to say it. "I do not think he is working for Celine," Aldrich said carefully. "No, I do not think so either." Evelyn pressed her palm harder against the cold iron of the workbench edge. "I think he is working for himself. I think he has been working for himself for a long time, and I think I was useful to him. And Celine is useful to him, and Riker's instability is useful to him, and at the end of it, Torin Marsh walks into a power vacuum at the Winter Assembly with council authority, military intelligence gathered from both sides, and the position of having publicly defended the wronged Luna while privately accelerating everything that made the wronging possible. The silence in the weapons hall was absolute. Outside, ordinary palace sounds continued. Boots, drills, carts on stone. The world performing its own ordinariness with complete indifference to what was fracturing inside this room. Evelyn stood at the workbench and let the full architecture of it finish assembling in her mind. Every piece she had placed with precision over 5 years. Every alliance built with patience and sacrifice. Every trust extended with careful deliberation. And somewhere inside that architecture, a man she had treated as an ally had been threading his own wire through her work the entire time, preparing to pull it at the moment of maximum leverage. She thought about what it would mean to have been this wrong. Not about Riker. She had never fully trusted Riker with anything that mattered. She had loved him and served him and known, in the part of her mind that runs below consciousness, that the day would come when his limitations would force a confrontation. That betrayal she had built armor against. This one she had not. Torrin had sat beside her at strategy sessions, had handed her information that proved accurate, useful, formative, had defended her publicly at the precise moment and in the precise way that made her trust the defense, had been the one to name the structural truth about her alliances out loud in the Moonfire Hall, the truth that set her entire counterplay in motion. He had handed her the strategy she was now executing, which meant he knew the strategy she was executing, which meant every move she had made in the last 4 days had been visible. Evelyn straightened up from the workbench. She unclenched her hand. The edge of the iron had left a red line across her palm, a thin, sharp mark that would bruise by evening. She looked at it. She pressed her fingers flat against her thigh and held them steady. "How much does he know?" Aldrich asked. "Everything I told him. Everything I let him see. Every resource and every timeline." Her voice was even, stripped of everything except the information. "He knows about Caro Vane." Aldrich's breath went out slow and hard. "If he moves on Vane before your meeting, then I walk into the Winter Assembly without the only independent alpha whose presence changes the political math. And without the letters. And without the letters. And with Torrin positioned to step in as the stabilizing elder authority the moment the assembly opens." "Yes!" Aldrich stood up from the bench. He was not a man who paced. He was a man who stood and committed to the direction when he had identified it. "What do you need?" Evelyn looked at the sword on the workbench, the edge freshly maintained, ready. She had spent 5 years building a structure designed to achieve her goals without direct confrontation, a campaign of patient accumulated leverage, the strategy of a woman who understood that power taken by force is power that requires constant defense, while power earned through demonstrated necessity is power that defends itself. That strategy had required her to be careful, measured, to work through channels and proxies and the careful architecture of obligation. The strategy had been compromised at its foundation, which meant the structure she had built was no longer the asset. The structure was the liability. Every layer of careful, patient work was now a map in Torrin's hands showing him exactly where to apply pressure to make it collapse. You cannot win a siege if the enemy already has your blueprint. You abandon the blueprint. She met Aldrich's eyes. "I need everything we have," she said. "Not in 10 days, not at the Winter Assembly. Now, tomorrow. I need the Northern Pack Alphas here, in this palace, before Torrin can reach them. I need Petra's original evidence from the courier, intercepted or not, because even a compromised document trail is a document trail, and I will use what I have. And I need you to find Len tonight and give him the choice of his life." Aldrich understood what that meant. "And Torrin?" he asked. Evelyn picked up the sword from the bench. She turned it once in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the balance point, the way a well-made weapon distributes itself between your palms when you hold it correctly. Then she set it back down. "Torrin has been playing the long game," she said. "He counted on me playing it too. He built his entire position around the assumption that I would be patient, careful, and strategic, because that is who I have always been." She moved toward the weapons hall door. "He should have asked himself why I was patient and careful and strategic," she said. "It was never because I preferred it. It was because I did not yet have everything I needed." She pushed the door open. The cold morning air hit her like a wall, sharp and clean and immediate. "I have everything I need now." She moved through the palace like weather coming in. Not running, not hiding. The long corridor from the weapons hall to the inner residential wing passed under her feet in measured strides, and every servant and guard who saw her coming got out of her way. Not because she asked them to, but because the quality of her movement left no room for misreading. There are people who carry urgency as noise, people who communicate crisis through speed and volume and the visible panic of a body that has lost its center. Evelyn had never been that. Her urgency lived in her stillness. The faster things moved around her, the more completely she compressed into the cold, quiet core of herself. And the wolves who had served in her vicinity long enough had learned to read that compression the way you read weather. When the Luna went still like that, you cleared the path. She had 6 hours, maybe less. Thorn would have known the moment she left the throne room after her confrontation with Riker that the compressed timeline had activated. He was old and patient, and he had spent decades reading the rhythms of this court. He would not wait. He would move in the window between her discovery and her response, because that was when she was most exposed, when the plan had cracked, but the new architecture had not yet hardened. She reached her quarters, went straight to the locked drawer, pulled the folio. She did not sit. She stood at the desk and opened it flat and took the list of 31 names and began marking the ones she could reach by nightfall. 11. Under optimum conditions with her fastest riders moving now, she could have 11 Alpha representatives physically inside the palace walls before dawn tomorrow. Not 31. 11. That was not a majority. That was not the overwhelming coalition she had spent years building toward. That was 11 wolves who owed her blood debt arriving in the middle of the night at a palace that was already crackling with internal fracture lines. It was enough to be visible. It was enough to change the shape of what Thorn and Celine would walk into. She wrote 11 names on a separate sheet. She wrote the routes beside each name, the riders to use, the specific language of the summons that would convey urgency without conveying desperation, because there is a difference between a leader calling her people to her side and a cornered wolf screaming for help, and every Alpha on that list would feel the difference before the ink on the letter was dry. The door opened without a knock. Evelyn did not reach for a weapon. She did not flinch. She turned with the folio already closed under her arm and looked at the door. Celine Hart stood in the doorway. She was not wearing the red silk. She wore something darker, a deep wine-colored riding coat over fitted trousers, her dark hair pulled back, and the effect was not softer, but sharper. She looked like a woman who had spent the morning making decisions and was satisfied with all of them. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her with the proprietary ease of someone who has decided the space belongs to them already. "You found out about Len," Celine said. No greeting, no performance. This was a different register than the banquet, than the public theater of possession and mockery. This was operational. Evelyn looked at her. "How much of my room did you go through?" "Enough?" "Then you know what I have." "I know what you had." Past tense. Celine stopped in the center of the room, 6 feet of open floor between them, and her eyes were flat and direct in a way they had not been at the banquet. The social weapon, the smile and the calculated cruelty, was gone. What replaced it was something Evelyn found significantly more useful to see: raw ambition, undecorated. The courier did not make it past the second waypoint. "The letters are in my possession. Originals." Evelyn said nothing. "The land grant records you memorized from the administrative annex? Thorn already pulled them this morning. Reclassified under emergency council authority. You cannot access the room. You cannot access the documents." Celine tilted her head. "You have a list of names and a ring. That is what you have." "Then why are you here?" Evelyn said. Celine looked at her for a moment. The question had weight to it that she had not expected, and she was deciding how to carry it. "Because Riker wants you gone quietly," Celine said. "Not a spectacle. He is embarrassed enough already. If you leave before the Winter Assembly voluntarily, with your rank formally surrendered, he will allow you to keep the northern territories you personally settled, your personal holdings. You walk away with land and name and nobody touches you." "And if I do not?" Celine's chin came up. "Then Thorn presents the council with evidence of an organized military opposition built inside the palace by the Luna herself. Conspiracy against the crown. Under the military statutes you wrote, that is grounds for immediate detention pending tribunal." "Under the statutes I wrote," Evelyn repeated. "You are very talented. You built excellent laws." There was no mockery in Celine's voice now. That was somehow worse. The absence of mockery meant this was purely transactional, which meant Celine had stopped underestimating her and started simply trying to win. The offer is real. Take the land and go. Evelyn set the folio on the desk behind her. She pressed her palms flat against the desk surface, feeling the grain of the wood under her hands, the solid, unambiguous reality of a thing that exists and will continue to exist regardless of what the people standing next to it decide to do. She thought about the land, her northern holdings, thousands of acres of border territory she had personally settled and secured, built into productive packland over a decade of work that nobody had helped her with and nobody had asked her to do. She could go there. She could live there. She could build something smaller and functional and entirely her own, something that did not require managing a king's failures and patching the cracks in an empire that kept widening no matter how much mortar she poured into them. She thought about the 11 names on the sheet in the folio. She thought about the faces behind the names. Wolves who had made oaths to her, not because she was the Luna, but because she had stood with them when it cost her something, and they had seen it, and they had understood that this was a person whose commitments ran deeper than rank or convenience. She thought about what it would mean for those wolves to hear that she had taken a land offer and walked away. She thought about the capital below the palace walls, the stone houses, and the kitchen smoke, and the ordinary lives that had been allowed to be ordinary lives because someone had been doing the unglamorous preventative work of keeping this kingdom functional. She thought about what those lives looked like inside a power vacuum, inside the governance of a man blinded by a woman whose network included framed innocents and bought officials and forged records. She thought about the fact that none of this was her problem, and she could choose that any time. She thought about the fact that choosing that would be the first genuinely dishonest thing she had ever done. "No," she said. Celine's expression shifted. Something moved behind her eyes, quick and controlled. "Evelyn, you came here expecting a negotiation. There is no negotiation." Evelyn straightened from the desk. "You came here because Torrin told you to come here. Torrin told you to come because he has spent 4 days watching me build a counterplay, and he knows what I am capable of, and he wants me gone before I finish it. The offer is real, and it is generous, and it is also Torrin Marsh recognizing that the cleanest outcome for him is one where I leave quietly, rather than one where I stay and make everything loud." Celine was very still. "Tell him no," Evelyn said. "Tell him I said that." Celine's jaw tightened once. She turned and walked to the door, and her hand was on the handle when she stopped. "You understand what happens now," Celine said. Not a threat, just the statement of a woman who had accepted the shape of a situation. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Do you?" The door closed. Evelyn crossed the room in 4 strides, opened the door, and stepped out into the corridor where Petra was waiting. She handed Petra the sheet with 11 names. "Now," Evelyn said. "All of them. Tonight." Petra looked at the list. She looked up. She saw something in Evelyn's face that she had seen twice before in her life. Once on a burning rampart, and once at the edge of a battle line that everyone except one person believed was already lost. She moved without another word. The next 4 hours were the longest Evelyn had spent inside her own mind since Ashenvale. She moved through the palace, and she did what needed doing, and her body operated on the clean mechanical efficiency that takes over when emotion is not an available resource. She met with Aldrich. She confirmed positions. She sent 2 of her own personal staff to specific locations with specific instructions delivered verbally, nothing written. She changed her route between meetings 3 times, not randomly, along a pattern she shifted in ways that were predictable to her and unpredictable to anyone watching who did not have access to her internal logic. She did not eat. She noticed that she had not eaten and filed it under irrelevant. At the 4th hour, Aldrich found her in the east corridor with the expression of a man who has received news and is choosing how to deliver it. "Caro Vane," he said. Her stomach dropped 6 inches. "What?" "His rider came in an hour ago. Vane is already moving. He did not wait for your meeting. He is riding for the capital with 40 wolves." Evelyn stared at him. "He received a message," Aldrich said carefully. "Not from you. From someone identifying themselves as your proxy, claiming you had advanced the timeline and needed him present immediately. Torrin. Torrin had sent for Vane using her name. Using her name to pull 40 armed wolves into the capital 48 hours before the Winter Assembly, which under the Territorial Compact constituted a threatening military movement, which under the military statutes Evelyn had written gave the Crown authority to seal the city gates and invoke emergency governance powers, which under emergency governance powers suspended the Council's authority to hear testimony or receive formal challenge. If Vane arrived at the Capitol gates tonight with 40 armed stoneback wolves, Riker had legal grounds to lock down the entire city, invoke emergency rule, suspend the council session, and move against Evelyn under conspiracy statutes before a single allied Alpha could reach her. The trap was elegant. She could not deny sending the message without admitting her network had been penetrated. She could not confirm sending it without triggering the lockdown herself. And she could not stop Vane without sending a countermessage that would require explaining a situation she did not have time to explain. Thorn had used her own resource as the mechanism to destroy her. The thing about the best traps is that they are built from your own materials. She had 6 hours before Vane reached the city walls. "Get me a horse," she said. Aldrich blinked. "You cannot ride out of the capital right now. If Torin or Celine reports to Riker that you have left the palace under current circumstances, I am not leaving the capital. I am riding to the north gate." She was already moving. "I need to reach Vane before he arrives. I need to speak to him in person before he touches the city boundary. Evelyn, if you are seen leaving the palace, then I am seen leaving the palace." She turned to face him, and the look on her face stopped whatever he was preparing to say next. "Aldrich, what is the first thing they teach you in command training? When your logistics are compromised and your supply line is cut and your position is indefensible, what is the single most dangerous thing you can do?" He knew the answer. Every soldier knew the answer. "Wait," he said. "I am done waiting." The horse they brought her was a gray northern-bred animal, heavy-boned and sure-footed on stone roads. And she threw herself onto its back without ceremony and rode hard out of the east gate into the last gray light of a winter afternoon that was running out of hours faster than she was. The road north from the capital was straight for the first 4 miles, lined with black poplar trees stripped bare for winter, their branches making a skeleton corridor overhead that the wind moved through with a sound like something breathing. She rode at full pace, leaning forward, the cold cracking against her face, the silver gown replaced with a riding coat she had grabbed from her anteroom because she had no time for the symbolic weight of silver anymore. The symbolism phase was over. She found Vane's party at the 8-mile marker, 40 wolves on horseback coming south in a column of 2, moving at a ground-eating canter, and at the front of them a man who looked exactly like what he was. Caro Vane was somewhere past 50, broad across the shoulders and narrow nowhere else, with a face like a geological feature and eyes that had the specific quality of exhaustion that never fully leaves someone who has spent decades carrying the weight of other people's lives. He pulled up when he saw her coming alone, and his raised fist stopped his column without a word. She reined in 6 feet from him. The horses breathed clouds into the cold air. Nobody moved. "Luna Thorn," Vane said. His voice was a low carrying instrument, the voice of a man who does not need to shout to be heard at the back of a crowd. "The message you received was not from me," Evelyn said. No preamble, no recovery of breath. "You were brought here early by someone who wants your presence at the city gates to trigger an emergency lockdown. You cannot enter the capital tonight." Vane studied her. He had the stillness of a man who makes decisions rarely and correctly. Whose message was it? Elder Torin Marsh, acting through my proxy communication channels, which he accessed by compromising one of my officers. "Torin," Vane said. He said the name the way you say something you have suspected for a long time and are not entirely surprised to have confirmed. He wants the throne for himself. He wants the chaos that clears his path to the council seat with supreme authority. Riker is the target. I am the tool he used to destabilize Riker, and now the obstacle he needs removed before he can install whatever puppet he has prepared. And you are here because I need you to not walk through that gate tonight. I need you here, outside the city, for 18 more hours. After that, I need you to walk through the gate in front of every allied Alpha who will be arriving for the Winter Assembly, publicly, by day, with 40 witnesses. Vane was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the poplars. One of his wolves shifted in the saddle behind him and went still again. "You are asking me to camp in a ditch for 18 hours in winter," Vane said. "I'm asking you to stay outside a trap that was built with your name on it. And in those 18 hours. In those 18 hours, I go back into that palace and I finish what I started." Vane looked at her. He looked at the riding coat and the horse and the single woman who had ridden out here alone into the dark at a full gallop to stop 40 armed wolves with nothing except information and the nerve to deliver it. Something moved in his face, not admiration exactly, recognition, the specific recognition of one person who has been doing the unglamorous structural work of keeping something real alive, seeing that quality reflected back at them by someone else who has been doing the same thing in a different context. 18 hours, he said. 18 hours. He looked at her for one more moment. "You're going to burn that palace down from the inside," he said, "with yourself still in it." Evelyn held his gaze. "I'm going to make sure the right things are still standing when the smoke clears." She turned her horse and rode back toward the capital, and the road narrowed behind her as the dark came fully in, and the lights of the city appeared ahead through the bare black trees like embers that had not yet decided whether to spread or die. Inside those lights, Torrin was moving. Celine was moving. Riker was sitting on a throne built on a foundation whose name was Evelyn Thorn, and he did not know yet that the foundation had stopped holding the weight quietly and was about to make the building understand exactly what it had been standing on. She came through the Capitol gate at full gallop. The guards stepped back. She did not slow down. In the great hall of the palace, the torches had been lit for the evening, and the winter assembly preparation banquet was already underway. 38 alphas from across the territories gathered around a long table, and at the head of it, Riker Vale sat with Celine at his side, and Torrin Marsh standing 2 steps behind the throne with the careful positioned neutrality of a man who has placed all his pieces and is waiting for the board to play out. The doors of the great hall opened. Evelyn walked in. She was dusty from the road and her hair had come half out of its arrangement, and there was cold in her skin that had not yet left, and she walked the length of that hall with every set of eyes in the room tracking her movement, and she did not stop until she was standing at the center of the floor, equidistant from the throne and the assembled alphas, in the exact center of the room's geometry. Riker stared at her. Torrin's expression did not change, but his left hand moved slightly, an involuntary micro-adjustment, the hand of a chess player whose opponent has just put a piece down in a location that was not in any of the modeled scenarios. Celine reached for her wine glass. Evelyn reached into the inside of her riding coat. She pulled out a single letter. She had not gone to her records room. She had not retrieved the folio. The letter had been on her body for 4 days, since the morning after the Moonfire Banquet, stitched into the lining of the coat she had worn to her records room the first time. The one document she had not trusted to a drawer or a courier or a locked space that someone else could access. Celine's original letter to the Eastern provincial officials, not the copies from the courier. The original that Petra had retrieved 3 weeks ago and handed to Evelyn directly, the one that had never left Evelyn's person since the moment she understood that the most secure location in a palace full of compromised spaces is the body of the person who needs to survive. She held it up. The firelight caught the seal. The handwriting was visible from 15 feet. Several of the assembled alphas nearest to her leaned forward. "I have a matter of council record to present," Evelyn said, and her voice carried to every corner of the great hall without any effort at all. "Before the winter assembly opens, before any formal proceedings, before any announcements are made." She looked at Riker. She looked at Torrin. She looked, last, at Celine. "I present evidence of criminal conspiracy against the Crown," she said, "committed by individuals currently in this hall, and I invoke my right as Luna of this realm to demand immediate council review." The great hall held its breath. Torrin's hand went still. Celine set the wineglass down. And Riker Vale looked at the woman he had tried to replace and saw, for the first time, the full shape of what she actually was. The letter made the sound of nothing when she set it on the council table. That was the thing about physical evidence. It did not announce itself. It did not perform. It simply existed, with the flat, patient certainty of a fact that has been waiting to be acknowledged, and the waiting had not diminished it at all. 38 alphas looked at the document. Several leaned forward in their seats. Elder Marin, the most senior council member after Torin, reached out and turned it toward herself without asking permission, and the firelight caught the seal and the handwriting clearly enough that the two alphas seated beside her could read it over her shoulder. The great hall remained breathless. Torin moved first. He stepped down from behind the throne, and his voice came out even and unhurried, the voice he had been cultivating for 40 years, the voice of institutional authority personified. "The Luna is in a state of distress," he said. "She has had a difficult week. What she is presenting as evidence is material that was under council review for classification, removed from the administrative archive without authorization. She is not presenting a case. She is making an accusation from a position of personal grievance." Every word was correct. Every word was delivered at exactly the right weight. He had the rhythm of a man who has controlled rooms his entire life and understood that the first person to frame the narrative controls the room's response. Evelyn had known he would do this. She had known it the way you know the weather is going to do exactly what it looks like it is going to do. "Elder Marin," Evelyn said. She did not respond to Torin. She did not look at him. She spoke directly to the oldest sitting council member in the room, the one woman at the table who had been on the council before Torin arrived, who had watched him accumulate influence over 2 decades with the particular attention of someone who had been watching a slow fire spread and waiting to see whether anyone else would notice. "You have the original letter in your hands. The seal is intact. The handwriting is Celine Hart's. The date is 3 months ago. The signatories are 3 provincial officials who received Eastern land grants from the royal office in the 4 weeks following that date." Marin looked at the letter. She looked at it for a long time. Her face was the face of a woman in her 70s who has seen enough of power's mechanics to have stopped being surprised by any of it, and has arrived at a place beyond surprise, a place of dry, precise reckoning. "The land grants," Marin said. She was not asking Evelyn. She was thinking out loud in the direction of the room. "I reviewed those grants. They came through the royal office under emergency agricultural authorization. They did not require Luna countersignature because they were classified as infrastructure development. They were classified as infrastructure development by the administrative officer who processed them," Evelyn said. "That officer was Davin Holt, who has since been identified as a member of a network operating under direction from within this hall." Torin's voice cut in. "This is speculation. The Luna is constructing a narrative from disconnected—" "Torin!" The voice came from the assembled alphas, not Evelyn. Alpha Gregor Strand of the Ironmouth Pack, a heavy-set wolf with a gray-streaked beard who had been sitting with his arms folded and his eyes moving between faces since Evelyn walked through the door. He was not one of her 31. He owed her nothing. He had no personal stake in her survival or her fall. "Let her finish." It was the sentence that changed the temperature of the room, because Gregor Strand's presence at this table was not personal. He was there as a representative of the Eastern Territorial Compact, 12 packs whose primary concern was trade stability and the reliability of the governance structures they were being asked to partner with. He had ridden 4 days to be at this assembly. He had not ridden 4 days to watch a domestic dispute. He had ridden 4 days because the Winter Assembly was supposed to solidify the trade framework for the next decade, and a woman had just walked into the room with a letter that suggested the Eastern land grants, the same land grants that formed the collateral basis for 2 of the Compact's major infrastructure investments, might have been fraudulently classified. That was not personal. That was economic. That was the kind of thing that 12 packs took seriously regardless of who was married to whom and who was sitting in which chair. Torin's mouth closed. Evelyn continued. She laid it out with the precision of a woman who had been rehearsing this testimony in her head for 4 days, not in front of a mirror, not as a performance, but in the silent internal repetition of someone who knows she will have exactly one opportunity to say these things in front of exactly these people, and there will be no second chance. She named the officials. She named the land grants and their fraudulent classification. She named the pack members who had been falsely accused of territorial violations to justify the seizure of their holdings, the holdings that were then transferred through the grant system to Celine's network. She named Davin Holt and his proxy authorization codes. She explained the mechanism by which royal seals had been used on documents that lacked the required Luna counter signature. She did not name Torin. She let the assembled evidence name him. The room filled with the particular silence of people who are putting things together and do not like what the completed picture looks like. Riker had not spoken. He sat on the throne and he watched, and the expression on his face was something Evelyn had never seen there before in 7 years of watching that face. It was not anger. It was not defensive performance. It was the expression of a man who is watching the floor he has been standing on reveal itself to be ice, and the ice is thin, and the cracking sounds have been happening for longer than he understood. And somewhere in the back of his chest is the first real intimation of what it will mean when it gives way completely. Celine sat beside him, and she was very still, the stillness of a woman who has run every remaining calculation and found no exit in any direction. When Evelyn finished, Marin set the letter down on the table with both hands. "I move for immediate suspension of the Winter Assembly proceedings pending formal council investigation," Marin said. "All motions currently under preparation for Assembly ratification are suspended. All personnel named in this testimony are restricted to palace grounds pending tribunal." 5 council members voiced agreement before she finished the sentence. Torrin stood. "The council does not have authority to suspend an assembly convened under royal prerogative. Only the Alpha King." "The Alpha King can concur or object," Marin said. She looked at Riker. The look was not unkind. It was the look of a woman who has watched young rulers make catastrophic errors before and understands that the most useful thing you can offer in this moment is clarity. "My king, do you concur with the suspension?" Riker looked at Marin. He looked at the 38 alphas watching him. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked last at Evelyn. Something passed across his face. It crossed quickly and without announcement, the way certain truths arrive not as revelations, but as confirmations of things the body already knew and the mind had been refusing to process. "I concur," he said. The great hall exhaled. In the 3 days that followed, the palace became a different kind of machine. The tribunal convened in the council chamber with Marin presiding and 4 other elders seated. Aldrich provided military testimony. Petra provided intelligence documentation. The courier who had been intercepted was found at a waypoint house outside the capital and brought in. He had not been harmed but had been held and was willing to speak at length about the instructions he had received and from whom. Torrin Marsh sat before the council on the second day and answered questions for 4 hours. He was precise and measured, and he conceded only what could not be contested and denied what could be made ambiguous. And the overall effect was the portrait of a man who had been operating in the gray space between legitimate strategy and criminal conspiracy for so long that he had ceased to experience any distinction between the two. He was not broken by the tribunal. He was diminished by it, the way old stone is diminished by water, not destroyed but reduced, and the reduction was visible in the way he held his shoulders by the end of the 4th hour, the slight rounding inward that a body does when the structure it was braced against is no longer there. He was removed from the council. He was not imprisoned. He was old, and his network had collapsed, and the system that had given his maneuvering its leverage was now the system delivering the verdict against him. And the council determined that exile from its chambers and from the capital was sufficient to render him inoperative. It probably was. A man whose power resided entirely in proximity to the center of governance becomes, when removed from that center, approximately nothing. Celine's tribunal was shorter. The letter was enough on its own. The signatures of the 3 officials were enough. The testimony from the Tupac families whose members had been falsely accused and whose land had been seized provided the human weight beneath the procedural framework, and several of the council members listening could not maintain their administrative composure through the testimony of a woman who described coming home to find her family's packland had been transferred to an entity she had never heard of, while her husband sat in a detention cell on charges that had been manufactured from nothing. Celine was stripped of her title as the Alpha King's chosen. She was stripped of all assets acquired through the Grant network. She was given 48 hours to leave the capital and 30 days to leave the territory. She left on the first morning. She left before dawn with a single cart and 2 wolves who were still willing to travel with her, and she went out the south gate, and the city did not watch her go because by then the city had other things to look at. On the 3rd evening, Riker came to find Evelyn. She was in the north garden, the one that looked out over the mountain face, sitting on the stone bench where she had sometimes sat in the early years of their marriage, when the weight of the palace became something she needed to put down briefly, and the cold mountain air was the only thing that helped. The garden was dormant in winter, everything cut back to the woody stalks that would produce something again in spring, and the bench was cold through the fabric of her gown, and she had been sitting there long enough that she had stopped noticing the cold. She heard his footsteps on the path. She knew them. 7 years of knowing those footsteps. He sat at the far end of the bench, leaving significant space between them. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the mountains, and she looked at the mountains, and the silence between them was not comfortable, but it was honest, which was more than most of the silences they had shared in the last 3 years. "I did not know about Torrin," he said finally. "I know. About the pack families, the false charges. I know you did not know, Riker. Does that matter?" The question was not rhetorical, it was genuine, the question of a man who was doing the actual accounting rather than the performance of accountability, asking whether ignorance modifies culpability, and genuinely uncertain of the answer. "It matters for the tribunal," Evelyn said. "It does not matter for what happened between us." He was quiet. "I chose her over you," he said. "In front of everyone? Yes. I let her speak to you the way she spoke to you." "Yes." He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had trained for war his entire life and spent most of his reign avoiding it, large and scarred and folded now in his lap with the careful stillness of someone who does not trust where they might go if they moved. "I do not know when I stopped seeing you." Evelyn considered that. She considered it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to consider anything. "You stopped seeing me when I became essential," she said. "That is not unusual. People stop seeing the things they cannot imagine losing. It is a kind of confidence. It becomes a kind of blindness." She paused. "I let you stop seeing me. That is my part of it. I made myself so indispensable, so structurally invisible, that I was easier to take for granted than to look at. That was not accident. I built that. I thought it was protection." Was it? For a while. She looked at the mountains. The last light was going out of the sky above them, the gray deepening toward dark, and the first stars were appearing in the band of clear sky at the horizon. Then it became the architecture of my own erasure. Riker turned to look at her. She could feel it, the weight of his attention, which had always been physically noticeable the way strong weather is noticeable, something you felt in the air before you saw it. "Tell me what you need," he said. "To stay." Evelyn felt the sentence arrive. She felt the full weight of it, and she sat with it for a long moment, not because she was uncertain of her answer, but because the question deserved the respect of being genuinely held before it was answered. She thought about what staying would mean. Not the practical architecture of it, she could design that in her sleep. The actual internal meaning of it. Whether the woman who had ridden out into the dark alone to stop 40 wolves with nothing except information and nerve was a woman who could sit in a room with this man and call it home. Whether 7 years of something real and 1 year of systematic erasure left enough structure for anything worth building. She thought about the word Petra had used. Replacing him. She had not been replacing him. She had been building the thing that came after the version of the kingdom that required her to be invisible to function. She had been building the version where the foundation was not underground but visible and named and structurally acknowledged. "I do not need anything from you to stay," Evelyn said. "That is what you have never understood. I was never here because I needed something from you. I was here because this kingdom needed someone to do what I do, and I could do it, and I did it, every day, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, because the work mattered more than the recognition. Evelyn, but I am done doing it invisibly." Her voice was even. It was not hard. The hardness had gone out of her somewhere in the last 3 days. Not because anything had softened, but because she had passed through the point where hardness was necessary and arrived somewhere on the other side that felt less like armor and more like bone. "If I stay in this palace, in this role, in any version of partnership with you or the crown, I do it with my name on what I build. Not as the Luna behind the king, as the authority I actually am. The council acknowledges it in writing. The territorial compact acknowledges it. The military command structure acknowledges it. Everything I have been doing in practice for 5 years, we make it official and formal and visible. Or I take my 11 Northern Alphas and my blood oath packs, and my 40 stoneback wolves who are still camped outside your north gate, and I leave, and I build something of my own." Riker looked at her for a long moment. He did not look like a king in that moment. He looked like a man, which was rarer and more significant. A man on the far side of a catastrophic error with the wreckage still cooling around him, trying to determine whether the honest accounting of what he had done and what it had cost was something he was capable of. Whether capability was sufficient, or whether the fact that the accounting was happening now, under compulsion and consequence, rather than before, from wisdom and attention, made it meaningless. "If I agree," he said slowly, "you become the equal authority in this realm. I have been the functional authority in several critical areas of this realm for 5 years. You would be catching the title up to the reality." He looked away. He looked at the mountains, and something moved through his face that she could not fully read, and she was surprised to discover that she was no longer trying to fully read it. For 7 years she had studied that face, learned every frequency of its moods, made a science of understanding what Riker Vale was feeling so she could manage around it. She was not doing that now. She was sitting beside him and letting his face be his own business and experiencing the strange, quiet spaciousness of no longer making another person's interior life her primary project. "All right," he said. The words were simple and he meant them, and they were not enough, and they were what he had. Evelyn nodded once. She stood from the bench. She stood slowly, the way she did everything now, with the deliberate, unhurried quality of a person who has stopped moving as though something is chasing her. The moon had come up over the mountain face, full and white, and so sharp in the cold air it looked cut from something harder than light. "Riker," she said. She looked at him, this man she had married on a battlefield with ash in her hair, this man she had loved in the practical way that carries water uphill, this man whose limitations she had spent 5 years managing and whose blindness had cost her more than she had ever let herself count. "I do not hate you. I want you to know that. I am not staying because I hate you, and I need to watch you face the consequences. I am not leaving because I hate you either. Whatever I decide, it is not about hate." He looked up at her. His eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "What is it about?" he said. "It is about what I actually am," she said, "and making sure the world learns to call it by its real name." She walked back through the garden toward the palace. Behind her, Riker Vale sat on the stone bench in the moonlight and did not move for a long time, and the mountains were very old and indifferent, and the cold came down off them the way it always came, patient and thorough and without any particular interest in the human decisions being made at their feet. In the weeks that followed, the Winter Assembly reconvened with a revised agenda. The Council installed new administrative protocols requiring dual authority signatures on all land transfers, military appointments, and trade agreements. The protocols were drafted in Evelyn's handwriting and ratified by 11 sitting alphas and 5 council members, and the document bore her name first in the signatory line, above the royal seal. Caro Vane came through the north gate in daylight with 40 stoneback wolves and attended the reconvened assembly, and when the new governance framework was presented, he was the first to place his palm flat on the table in the old way, the way that means I see this and I stand behind it, and 12 other alphas followed him. Alpha Gregor Strand of the Ironmouth Compact signed the Eastern Trade Agreement under the new framework and noted formally in the council record that his compact's confidence in the stability of the territorial governance had increased substantially, and the specific reason he cited was the demonstrated existence of an accountability mechanism that functioned under pressure, which was the most rigorous test of any mechanism and which this one had passed. Evelyn read that entry in the council record 3 times. Not because she needed to, because she wanted to, because there is something in being accurately seen, formally and on record, that does something to the part of you that spent years being invisible by design, and she wanted to let it do that thing fully, rather than walk past it in the hurry of the next task. She was not done with the next task. She was never done. The work of a functional governance structure is not the work you finish. It is the work you maintain, and maintain, and maintain, season after season, the way you maintain a road or a wall or anything built to last longer than the person who built it. But she was doing it with her name on it now, and that changed the weight of it, not lighter. No, the actual mass was the same or greater, but distributed differently, carried differently,
The way the same stone feels different when you choose to carry it versus when someone placed it on you while you were sleeping and you woke up already bearing the load. On the morning of her formal investiture as co-ruling authority of the realm, she stood at the window of her quarters and looked at the capital below and breathed. One long breath, all the way to the bottom of her lungs, the cold air of a winter morning that had decided to be clear, bright, the kind of cold that sharpens rather than numbs, the kind that makes the mountains look close enough to touch. Petra knocked and came in without waiting for an answer. "Council is assembled," Petra said. "I know." Petra looked at her. They had known each other long enough that they did not always need to use many words, which is a form of intimacy rarer and more durable than most of the ones that announce themselves. "How do you feel?" Petra asked. Evelyn considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. She felt the scar along her left temple, which she always felt in cold weather, a faint reminder of the rampart and the blade and the body she had dragged through smoke. She felt the weight of the signet ring on her left hand. Not the Luna's ring. She had taken that off. A different ring. The administrative seal, the one that bore her name and her authority without referencing her relationship to anyone else. She felt the steadiness of her own feet on the stone floor, the specific solidity of a body that has survived everything it has encountered so far, and is still, against all reasonable probability, upright. She felt the absence of the old weight, the invisible architecture, the structural labor performed underground. The water carried uphill for a village that did not know. Water did not arrive by accident. She felt something in its place that did not have a clean name. It was adjacent to peace without being peace, which requires stillness, and she was not still. It was adjacent to pride without being pride, which requires looking backward at what you accomplished, and she was looking forward at what came next. It was something more like alignment, the state in which what you do and who you are point in the same direction, and you no longer spend energy on the friction between them. "I feel like myself," she said. Petra smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that lives mostly in the eyes, but it was real, which made it worth more than 100 larger ones. "The council is waiting," Petra said. "Then let's not make them wait." Evelyn turned from the window. She walked to the door and she opened it, and the corridor beyond it was full of the ordinary morning light of a palace that was still standing and would continue to stand, and the work ahead was long and necessary and real, and she was the right person for it, and she knew that now in the clean, unargued way, you know things that have been earned rather than assumed. She walked down the corridor and did not look back, not because there was nothing behind her worth seeing, because everything that mattered was in her hands already, had always been in her hands, and the direction she was moving was the only direction that held anything new. The council chamber doors were open. She walked through them, and the work continued.